Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event, which is Dare to Compare, which is going to be a comparison of Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain versus Dynamics Business Central warehouse management functionality. So we're going to kind of walk through the agenda here real quick, and we'll get in and introducing our speakers. My name is Dave McLaughlin. I am the industrials leader for our Dynamics 365 practice here at RSM. Today, we're going to give you just a kind of a quick, short practice overview of what we're all about in our Dynamics practice. We're going to give you some insight on a couple of sample client profiles, and then we get kind of into the meat of our discussion where we compare finance and supply chain versus business central. And this webinar is really intended today for those that are looking to go down this Microsoft cloud path and are kind of on the edge between finance and supply chain and business central. Really kind of focusing on the warehouse piece, obviously, and give you more insights so you can make those decisions in your selection process. We'll speak to some hardware considerations. We'll talk about accelerators that we bring as RSM that fill some of our needs that we see with our typical clients. We'll talk a little bit about the warehouse skill unit and kind of what Microsoft has coming there, and then kind of give you some next step options if you want to have a deeper conversation or perhaps a more in-depth demo. So we'll go right into introductions, and we'll turn it over to our guest speakers today, which are, and Connor, if you can go to the next slide, Connor Locker and Mark Bernat, and I'll let them introduce themselves, turning it over to you, Connor.
All right, thanks, Dave. I'm Connor Locker. I'm a supervisor within our D365 Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain practice, and I'm on the industrials team. And I am one of our warehouse solution architects.
Hi, Connor. I'm Mark Bernat. I'm a director in our BC practice. I focus as a team lead on delivery of BC implementations. I'm a solution architect, and I work out of the Atlanta, Georgia office. Connor, we're going to start here just a little bit with a little bit of an overview on our practice. As a 30-year Microsoft partner, as you might imagine, we have thousands of Dynamics customers, over 2,000 Dynamics customers, and we are and have been one of the largest Microsoft Gold partners in the US. Of our 1,200 plus Microsoft technology consultants, over 600 of them work with our Dynamics practice, and if you do your research at all, you'll see that Microsoft year after year is awarded with Microsoft recommendation and other industry commendations, I should say, for their performance and for the assistance that they provide to those users across the United States. Connor, if you want to jump over to the next slide just real quick. We have offices throughout the United States and in Canada. We do some development in Asia and Central America. And as one of the largest Microsoft Gold partners in the US, we've done over $2.4 billion in revenue. You might see or notice some of the logos down in the lower right of this slide. Some of our valued clients who we've done very successful implementations for, utilizing our ERP implementation strategies. You know, our focus areas, our solution areas, are in business applications, the finance, supply chain, commerce, field service, even at HR, across all of those applications, and we also work, with some of the most exciting things that are coming out right now in these ERP areas around data and business intelligence, whether that's Power Applications, business intelligence reporting and dashboards through Power BI, or data movement and data validation through Power Automate and other virtual agents. Our focus industries really are tied to food and beverage, consumer packaged goods, nonprofit, life sciences, and distribution and healthcare, We're very strong in the food and beverage area, especially. Connor, if you want to jump ahead here, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the differences or the functional comparison between D365 Finance and Supply Chain and Business Central from a warehouse perspective. And if you jump to that next slide, you notice that nearly every box is checked on the Finance and Supply Chain column here. And that's no less than we would expect from a tier 1 ERP system that is, considered top of the line and competes against the most capable ERP systems out there. That's what we expect from FNSC. So we probably won't go very deep into each of the functionalities on the finance and supply chain side because we know they check that box, right? Connor, I believe in a little bit you're going to talk about some of our IP, especially as it relates to the ProShip shipping service. Let's focus a little bit more though on for our clients who are considering Business Central, where Business Central fits their business a little bit closer. Where do we bridge some of that functionality where BC leaves off and FNSC would take over? Where do we bridge some of those areas to provide some of that functionality for the BC client, right? The client that needs BC in their business for many reasons, but needs some of this functionality that would exist natively in a tier 1 ERP system like finance and supply chain. RSM's implementation methodology considers not only Business Central functionality out of the box, but we have a trusted partner in InsightWorks that provides many of the capabilities that we need in this area. And we have an additional set of IP that we've written specifically to work both with Business Central and with the InsightWorks functionality that bridge some of those gaps and cross some of those things. One of those areas that is most important to many of our clients is about quality control and being able to measure quality not only on items that we might receive from our vendors, but items that we might produce or other methods of movement. Even if we move it from one warehouse to another, we want to verify the quality before we make that inventory available for consumption or for fulfillment of a customer order. And RSM has IP around this area. We've written a quality control accelerator that manages this at a ledger entry level and allows user-defined quality measurements so that we can not only protect inventory and for lack of a better word, quarantine it and not utilize it until it's past a quality control step, but we could also do metrics around our quality and reporting based on the types of measurements, whether that's a temperature, whether that's a visual check, whether that's any type of other quality measurement that we might have on a product. We can store that data in Business Central and we can report on it later. One of the other areas around IP that we utilize in Business Central and in finance and supply chain is our integration to third-party label printing and routing. And Connor, I believe you're going to talk a little bit about that later, but it's very important. And the other piece here that we wanted to mention today, we're going to talk about ProShip in a little bit because it's a key RSM IP strategy on the FNSC side. We want to note though that we are able to do real-time shipment rate calculations, both standard carriers like FedEx and UPS and Postal Service, and LTL carriers or other freight type opportunities through our partnership with InsightWorks and their product. We integrate their dynamic ship product with a third-party company to provide those rate shopping services. And we can do that in BC if that's one of your needs. So I wanted to guide you away from that. That functionality does not exist because that simply is related to our ProShip shipping integration around rate shopping and other shipping integrations. We can handle that on the BC side. Another area that is very common to ERP implementations is license plates and palletized inventory. This is functionality that is available in full functionality here out of the box from FNSC. In Business Central, we accomplished this again through our partnership with InsightWorks. We can do full license plating, and we can manage the data that is stored with the license plate. We can ship, we can consume, we can move inventory by the license plate and move the entirety of the inventory that is stored within that license plate or within that pallet, within that container, whatever that container might be. It doesn't necessarily even have to be a pallet. Perhaps it's a tank, perhaps it's a truck, or perhaps it's a tote or other type of plated inventory. We can consume or move that based on that license plate. And Connor, if you jump ahead to that next slide for me, please. Another one of our IP areas that we handle both in Business Central and in Finance and Supply Chain is around sales allocation. Our clients, and I'm sure if you're listening, you've seen this, whether it's on your supply chain side, getting the inventory that you need to do your business, or whether it's the production that you're making and having to make decisions about which of your customers get how much of their order at a time. On both the FNSC and the BC side, we have IP to do sales allocation and proration, and we can help you make sure that your customers get the inventory based on what's important to you, the ones that are the most important contracts to you. Those customers will get the inventory that you have available to allocate, and that's really key IP, Connor, right now in the current environment that we have, that we see with supply chains all across the world. Connor, if you want to move to the next slide, I think we're going to talk a little bit about support for our barcode and scanning devices.
Yeah, so for our next section here, we had some call outs that we are going to make as part of the list that Mark just walked through, where we wanted to show some of the functionality, or we wanted to talk a little bit about some of that functionality and kind of give a brief insight into what that functionality looks like or does within Finance and Supply Chain and Business Central. So the first one we were going to start with was support for barcode scanning. So using a mobile device with the D365 Finance and Supply Chain Warehouse Management app, you are able to connect to that device and complete mobile or WMS transactions. We'll talk about some of the devices and what devices we recommend a little bit later from now. But as you can see in the screenshots here, we have our main menu, which is an example main menu that includes all inbound, outbound, inventory, inquiry transactions. And then on the right-hand side of the Finance and Supply Chain screenshot, we have the ability to scan a work ID. Almost anything that needs to be entered into the mobile device itself, we can make scannable in some regard. Or at full capacity. So that's what we have in the Finance and Supply Chain side. And Mark, I'm anxious to hear more about BC.
So this is one of those areas where we utilize our partnership with InsightWorks, and they have an application that really works with nearly every function that we might need to do within the warehouse, whether that's a movement or a consumption or simply even an inventory query. We also utilize the handheld device for doing inventory counts, and our clients have found that using this application for doing inventory counts is drastically increasing, or decreasing, I should say, the amount of time it takes them to do a physical inventory or a cycle count through their process.
All right, the next piece that we wanted to touch on here was label printing and label routing. So you can see on the left-hand side here, I did provide a link as part of this slide as needed if it needs to be referenced later. But we do have ZPL code that is stored within the D365 web interface. So it stands within the back office system. You store the ZPL code there, and you have call outs to whatever fields are necessary for your label requirements. And this is, for the most part, this is based off of a outbound transaction. So I put an example screenshot here of an example label from one of our clients and what that would look like coming out of D365. Obviously, you can mess with the barcodes and fonts and sizes based off the ZPL code that you put into the system itself. From an inbound perspective, we also have the ability to do license plate label printing. It's native to D365 as well. So we do have inbound components and outbound components that are stored within finance and supply chain from a ZPL, as well as calling additional fields perspective.
And Connor, from a Business Central perspective, again, we utilize InsightWorks for barcode management. We have the ability to manage the barcode rules. We can do today one-dimensional barcode printing directly from Business Central, and one of the upcoming updates to the product is going to support 2D and QR codes as well. But in today's world, from the InsightWorks application, we can manage any barcode type label printing or label routing that we might do directly from the application. The native output is PDF. We have modified that code to support ZPL as well, and we're going to talk a little bit later about both from an FNSE side and from a Business Central side, how we can integrate and make label and printing even easier in your implementation.
All right, next we're going to talk about license plates as well as palletized inventory. So Mark spoke a little bit before about how important this is to having a WMS system. Everything in the WMS system itself is going to be driven off of some of these license plates or palletized inventory for ease of moving, for ease of picking, or just ease of any type of warehousing transaction. So in the top left-hand side here, we see that we have a hierarchy within the system. So this is going to be a reservation hierarchy. So how inventory is reserved within the system itself when you're releasing a wave to the floor. And we'll talk a little bit more about waves in one of the upcoming slides here. But you could set your warehouse up to reserve inventory at a license plate level, and we could have batch handling for that. So we could do first in, first out, or first expired, first out. However, we need to handle those lots. And then on the bottom right-hand side of the screen here, you could see that we have a license plate label that is stuck on some of the product from our example client that was UTS. It's just a label, and we found that this type of LP label, even at a 3-stack or 4-stack high pallet, still works with a long-range scanner. And we'll talk about some of those scanning capabilities and what we design as our deployment strategies a little bit later in this presentation.
So kind of from the Business Central side, this is one of those areas where our RSM IP works with our InsightWorks partner here, who supplies the license plate functionality for Business Central. Our IP extends that functionality so that we can carry lot attributes over into the license plate itself. I believe that those are referred to as dimensions in finance and supply chain. And we also manage the ability to do more things at a license plate level than is available either out of the box with Business Central or with InsightWorks natively. For example, we can consume inventory at a license plate level on a production order rather than having to break down and consume the individual inventory and lots that's a part of that license plate.
Okay, next component we're going to talk about here is outbound wave processing. So in the finance and supply chain side, wave processing allows for the allocation and generation of work based off the parameters on threshold, containerization, replenishment, and some other details that we want to be built as part of the wave. So waves in D365 can be organized by mode of delivery, by customer type. However, we want to break those waves out in order to allocate and generate work better within our facility, or how we need it within our facility. So one of the words in the description there is threshold. So we're able to set a shipment threshold. So let's say a shipment makes it to 50 lines on a wave, or let's say a wave makes it to 50 shipments and has the line requirements as well. We could have that wave max out, so we're not dropping waves to the warehouse floor that they could potentially not handle. From a containerization perspective, that's going to be generated off of your your physical dimensions on the product. We're going to build containers based off the sizing requirements that you define as part of parameters in D365, and build what can actually fit in those containers from a depth, height, weight, or width perspective, as well as a gross weight perspective. So if there's a max weight per container size. And the last piece here was replenishment. So if you have wave demand replenishment, or real-time replenishment, some people call it, that could be generated when you process a wave as well. So if the product's not sitting in one of your fixed or housing locations, we could pull it from a reserve area to bring it to those locations to then be able to pick the product for that individual wave.
So, Connor, from a Business Central perspective, this is one of those areas where finance and supply chain just really shines. In Business Central, most of our implementations don't require this complex of a generation of work, but we can generate work within the warehouse environment based on some parameters that we define, and we can manage that through dashboards and queue processing that we've done through our partnership with InsightWorks.
All right, I think this is our last item on the list that we're going to talk to on the call outs from specific feature sets within finance and supply chain and BC. But this one is support for multiple picking strategies. So I think anyone that has worked in the warehousing space involving technology and WMS system understands that each facility has differences, and each facility is going to be driven differently from a rules perspective and what gets picked first, as well as how they want to pick their warehouse. So in finance and supply chain, I put a screenshot of an example warehousing facility on the left-hand side here, and we map this out so that we can determine where a user wants to pick first, where we want to break the work, and other additional details that we wanted to happen to be able to pick more efficiently. So in the upper right-hand side here, one of the things that we used to kind of drive that was our locations. So we had these large locations or aisles that had barcodes that were above the rows, so that we were able to scan those to inquire on the product, or be able to drive the picking via a sort code in a more efficient fashion. And on the bottom right-hand side of our finance and supply chain slide here, or portion here, we have an example pick list. So we have in the pick list itself, it's a little bit small, but how we organized it is we had pallets being picked first and then transitioning it into cases. And we organize it so that it sorts you to the first location within that aisle for the pallet first. So the criteria was picked by the highest unit, which would be pallets first, and then picked by sort code, which would drive you to A1, A2, A3, A4, or however you organized it to be most efficient.
So, Connor, on the Business Central side, again, the picking strategies are typically a little bit less complex. We use both bin priorities and item priorities to determine a picking order or a put away order from a standpoint of the operational flow within the warehouse. This can be configured primarily through bin priority, and a lot of it depends on whether or not those picks and putaways are being directed by the system, or whether we're sorting them by one of these priorities.
Okay, we're gonna try to get back on the correct slide here as what is being presented. I just noticed that in the send live area, it does not look like the slide was updated from outbound wave processing to the support for multiple picking. So I'm gonna try to make sure the correct slide is on screen. Right. Please bear with me here. All right, so I think we're set for the support multiple picking strategies. Again, we both talked through this list, and we have the finance and supply chain on the the left-hand side, organized warehouse, and we were able to define picking. And then Mark talked about the picking strategies within BC as well. Next piece or next component that we're going to talk about here is hardware. So when it comes to hardware, that would be your mobile devices that you are using, as well as the label printers that you could potentially be using. We have some deployment considerations. So some warehousing mobile device deployment considerations is that we would recommend starting with the minimum devices believed to be needed for your facilities and increase the device count from there. Until you start testing, until you go through your testing cycles, go lives, mock go lives, you're not going to really understand how many devices you truly need until it is tested. So that is why we recommend starting with the minimum and scaling up from there. The next deployment consideration would be choose the device based on the environment need. So there are instances previously where I talked about pallets being stacked high and we needed long range scanners for that. So it's important to get the device that would fulfill the requirements that you need within your facility. So some of these common device differentiators are accessories. Do we have wrist straps? Do we have a handheld gun attachment? So what is your floor going to be more prone to use? Do they want to attach their handheld gun attachment to a forklift and use the long range scanner? Are they going to be scanning more of a case by case environment? So they're going to be piece picking. In that case, they probably want wrist straps. Are you going to use a long distance or short range scanner? So in our case with the mobile device, we've had 4 pallets stacked high. We had to hit the LP on the top pallet. In that case, you would 100% need a long distance scanner. Whereas if you're going to be standing right next to the product that you're picking, a short range scanner is going to suffice for that. All right, so I'm going to go quickly kind of through some of our recommendations on mobile device hardware. So for the most part in our industry, you're going to see Zebra as well as Honeywell printers that could connect to a cloud network. Some other players that are in the mix are Panasonic. We got Data Logic on the Business Central side, as well as CipherLab. From a label printing perspective, it's the same. So Zebra and Honeywell kind of are the preferred devices for our clients, and then we have to have the device be able to connect to a network where it can receive inbound code, whether that code be ZPL or some other language. You need to confirm that it's based off of your need with a printing language, or you are going to have to send that type of data and get a printer that is able to accept that data. So finance and supply chain, when we were walking through a lot of the standard out-of-the-box functionality, it actually accepted ZPL, and we were sending ZPL. So that's how finance and supply chain is organized. Accelerators. The first accelerator I'm going to talk about, and these accelerators are ones that, first ones we're going to go through are on the finance and supply chain side only, and that's going to be ProShip. And then we'll talk about another one that is going to be system agnostic later as well. So what is ProShip? So ProShip is a third-party platform that enables flexibility to deliver package to customers by providing shipping, tendering, and label management through all major and regional carriers. ProShip increases your shipping flexibility while decreasing your costs. So what the ways it's going to do that is rate shopping. So the system could rate shop for you, or it could allow for a manual rate shop based off the services within a specific type of mode of delivery. ProShip also has proactive maintenance. They're able to have flexible label creation, so the requirements of all the major carriers, UPS, FedEx, USPS, we're going to be able to generate a label with all of the shipment data with those specific label templates. And then shipping compliance, there is going to be an end-of-day job within the system that's going to send the details needed to all of the major carriers based off of what shipped out of your facility. So what does the RSM ProShip Accelerator do? So the RSM ProShip Accelerator handles the integration between D365 and ProShip. And it handles that from a labeling, from a manifesting perspective, from the shipment confirmation piece to confirm what is going to ProShip and the details around that shipment. It's going to allow for rate shopping in D365 itself. So we're going to have an instance where it's going to call out to the ProShip database and pull the rates for a specific dimension and weight set for your containers. It also allows for scale integration. So what we built in was you can connect to a scale and set up a scale integration so your weights are correct in each shipment, and you can validate your weights, and those will pull in automatically. And then there's also handling for LTL shipments. On the right-hand side, as you can see, housed in D365, we do have a FedEx example label here. So that is able to be pulled into D365, or you could send that to other printing softwares as needed as well. And that is it for our ProShip accelerator. The next one I'm going to talk about here is our third-party label integration. So the RSM third-party label integration accelerator is a web service integration that deals with third-party label making software. So if D365 Finance and Supply Chain can't handle your label requirements, if you have extremely complicated label requirements where you have a massive amount of customers and they're changing extremely frequently, it might make more sense to have a third-party software. For example, Bartender is commonly used. And this is, to repeat again, this is for Business Central and Finance and Supply Chain where we have this type of functionality. But within the accelerator itself, we allow for the ability to print labels directly from master records to ability to print labels from documents. We have rule-based label logic, so we're able to send specific data to a web server that then pulls the data that we sent to build out their shipment labels based off of what we determined needed to be the label that was used for that specific transaction. We also allow for printing of inbound transactions, so that could be license plates, production orders, purchase orders, those types of details. And that is it for the third-party label integration, and that is in FNSC and BC.
Connor, I think it's
Go
important to note on the third-party label integration, the potential tremendous amount of savings that a typical company can achieve by simply implementing something such as this and being able to manage their labels through that third-party label making software. The not having to go back for a development event every time we need some new label format is a huge advantage that we've seen certainly on our BC implementations, and I'm assuming that you've seen that as well on the finance and supply chain side.
Yes, we've seen that as well. And having this type of accelerator, which is going to be able to handle multiple third-party label integrations as a feature set for us, is a huge value add, because we see this at almost every client I think we go to. All right, so the next piece we're going to talk about here is the Edge framework. So the Edge framework is Microsoft's new transaction handling framework. It's called the warehouse scale unit, and I want to differentiate between scaling a business versus scaling from a managing of a separate transaction perspective. Both BC and finance and supply chain can scale from a transactions perspective, but finance and supply chain has these extra pieces which they call a scale unit, which allows for offline execution and some additional features that we'll talk about over the next few slides. So what is a scale unit? So a scale unit is a cloud or on-premise network meant to manage specific workloads. And these scale units are separate databases that involve unique APIs that are then written back to a central hub or back office system. So in the finance and supply chain side, you would view your back office or hub system to be the web server AOS that your or web server that your system is on. So if you're going to a specific URL and you landed on a finance and supply chain main page, that would be the back office or hub that I am referring to. This would be separate. So this separates that from the hub, and we'll talk about some of that architecture in a few slides here. But this separates the workloads for warehousing as well as manufacturing from the central hub. So what this allows for is improved back office transaction processing time. You no longer have to have all of the work that is related to the manufacturing or warehousing processes be completed each time you run that transaction in the back office. Instead, it can be held on these scale units and then be written back via a batch. So you have less reliance on the central hub, which we've already talked about. You're pulling these two different types of transactions, which are a huge bog down on the central hub. You're pulling those out and having them stand alone on their own individual units. And then we have allowance for offline transactions. So there's two types of scale units, and we'll compare them in the next slide. But there is an allowance for offline transactions, whether you cannot connect to the internet in a facility. There is an on-prem storage, which is going to be the edge scale unit. And then the cloud scale unit does allow for some offline execution, but it's a little bit different. So scale units. So a big thing for these warehouses and these manufacturing facilities is that you can't go down for hours on end and just wait there for an update to occur. So scale units are going to be updated within minutes, whereas it can take hours for the back office to do an update for a platform update or upgrade or some type of other thing that needs to happen to your environment. So that's a key feature set. You don't really have to deal with downtime for longer than a short period of time anymore with these scale units. So what is the difference between a cloud scale unit and an edge scale unit? So the similarities are they're independently scalable workloads. So any workloads that occur within the warehousing or manufacturing space get pulled out from the central hub, and they scale on their own, and you can have these by facility or however your technical architecture needs to be for that. And as we talked about before, these are isolated from other business processes. Differences. So the cloud scale unit is going to include licensing costs, but you're not going to have to pay for additional hardware because it's not on-prem. The edge scale unit is going to have licensing and hardware costs, so both of those will be included. The cloud scale unit doesn't have offline execution. And when I say this, I want to talk about if you're offline in a warehousing or manufacturing environment, you are not going to be able to write those transactions back to the central hub or store them within the cloud scale unit. So, however, if just the back office or central hub is offline, say you're doing an upgrade or an update, the cloud scale unit can store that transaction data and then write it back to the back office once it is back online. And the edge scale unit, it allows for offline execution for up to 24 hours. So that's extremely valuable. There's always the question of what do we do if we go down? What do we do if we lose connection to some type of unit, but we still have our Wi-Fi in place? That's a question that comes up on almost every client, is those different types of scenarios. Edge scale unit does allow for offline transactions for up to 24 hours. So it stores it in an on-prem database. So here's the scale unit architecture. This is from Microsoft, is that we have the main central hub, which is going to be located in the top left. That's going to be all of your back office or normal transactions that would occur, APAR, all of those details. And then we have three facilities. Let's say we lost connection to facility 3. So facility 3 is now able to handle those warehousing execution workloads and manufacturing execution system workloads separately and store those within those scale units itself. So once that connection is then reestablished, it can write those transactions back to the warehousing and manufacturing back office to then kind of restore the sync between the two. All right, so what's next? We just threw all of this data at you in regards to finance and supply chain, Business Central. What are the benefits or pros and cons of both of them? Well, what's next is we do have warehouse assessments. So in our warehouse assessments, we normally evaluate a facility and understand what the processes are, what the volumes are, what types of flows you have within a facility. We look at your current interfaces as well as your directives. We look at which equipment and methods are deployed. We look at your productivity and efficiency. So are there any clear bottlenecks that we could help you get over? Quality and accuracy. So those are the types of things that we're going to see a lot in our manufacturing spaces. So we want to make sure that our quality and accuracy is being looked at. And then risk mitigation. So how can we take any of the risks of not being able to, for example, meet the allocation for all of the needed customers during these tight supply chain times? What are some suggestions we have for that? If you wanted to book a warehouse assessment, on these next two slides, I have Clayton Jones as the contact. It's Clayton Jones at rsmus.com, and he'll be able to direct you to the correct person for these warehouse assessments. But we also have demos. So if you would like to see finance and supply chain and BC in a demo environment, we talked about what the pros and cons are, but it's really tough to see what the actual pros and cons are unless you're seeing it in person in a demo. We could set that up for you. So we could do any type of end-to-end processing from inbound to outbound to specific inventory transactions or other transactions that could be potentially related to your facility that are involved within the Microsoft FNSC or BC spaces. We can help show that to you. So again, contact Clayton Jones if you are interested in having one of those completed, whether that be a warehouse assessment or a demo, and we can get that set up for you. All right, I think we had some time to discuss some questions and hopefully provide an answer here for any of our attendees. If you would write your questions down. I think we probably worked on consolidating those over the last few minutes here, if there has been any, and we can help you in answering some of those questions you had throughout our presentation.
So Mark, so far the only question that's come in through the chat, through the live Q&A, and David has already responded to it, is what is a clear indicator of the choice between FNSC versus BC for warehouse management? And then the questioner goes ahead and offers some examples of size or annual revenue and things like that. If you're not able to see the chat, David responded that the choice is rarely between these products based on the WMS functionality itself. It's driven by other considerations, usually, such as the size and scale of the organization. FNSC is considered the enterprise product, which is you know, for the more complex solutions, and we've tried to demonstrate today where the BC product for those companies for which it's appropriate can meet some of these needs as well. If you have these advanced needs, for example, Connor just spent some time around wave processing. This offline capability and wave scaling is not going to exist. Excuse me, I said wave scaling. I meant the edge framework and the warehouse scales. They're just simply not going to exist in a middle tier ERP system such as Business Central. And so if that is in part of your requirements list, you're going to be needing to look at the FNSC product specifically for that. But again, as David says, that's generally going to be made by the entirety of the consideration, not just the warehouse management functionality. Connor, I'm not seeing any other questions yet coming in over the chat. Did you want to wait a few minutes?
Yeah, we'll hang on for probably 30 seconds to another minute here. But if you do have any questions, you couldn't think of it during this presentation, and you wanted to ask it to Mark, myself, please reach out. I know Clayton's contact is within the presentation itself, but we could help you get those answers, whatever they may be. All right. With that being said, I think that I am not seeing any more questions, so I'm going to go ahead and work on ending the live event. I really appreciate everyone joining today, and I hope you were able to understand some of the key differences within the WMS space between the finance and supply chain and Business Central platforms.
Thank you for attending, everyone.